next we have with us Ms. Victoria Yates with her session Climate Change Denial and Its Impact on Sustainable Development. Ms. Victoria Yates recently graduated from the University of Portsmouth with a first-class Bachelor Honours degree in International Development, which covered a broad overview of the world's greatest problems. Her dissertation thesis was called How the Trump of the West and the Trump of the Tropics Play a Trump on Our Planet, a critical analysis of climate change denial. The purpose of this essay was to highlight common tropes of climate change denial and to alert attention to the danger this could have on sustainable development. In 2019, she won the first stage of the HULT Prize with Wireless Wild, a startup focused on quantifying the losses in biodiversity due to climate change and development. In 2021, Victoria led the EMENA regional competition for the HULT Prize in the UK, and currently she is interning at the world's largest student accelerator program for the next phase of the program, working in the expert relations team alongside the CEO and COO. Over to you, Ms. Victoria Yates, for your session on climate change denial and its impact on sustainable development.
Thank you for the introduction. I have got COVID right now, so I'm
oh my God.
Yeah, I've been really bad, but I still wanted to come, but I'm really sorry about my voice, everyone. I sound a bit husky.
Hats off to your commitment. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, they're my slides. Like, great. So I will get started. Thank you for the flattering introduction. I really appreciate that. Oh. Yeah, thanks for the invitation as well to Santosh. It's an incredible summit, and I'm truly inspired by every speaker I've heard so far when my Wi-Fi has not been dropping in and out. I am Victoria Yates from the UK. I am currently a master's student studying climate change development and policy at the University of Sussex, which is the top uni in the world for development. So I also partner with the Institute of Development Studies there to take it even further, after previously studying my BA honours in international development. And having, as you mentioned, having completed my dissertation on an analysis of Trump and Bolsonaro's use of climate change denial, this has led me here to discuss my chosen topic with you today on climate change denial and its impacts on sustainable development. So, in contrast to the UN's claims that climate change is the biggest threat modern humans have ever faced, I actually argue that climate change denial poses an even greater plague to our societies. What do I mean by this? Well, we can all see that the COVID-19 pandemic has significantly reduced worldwide CO2 emissions. If we all continue to cut our emissions, then the negative effects of climate change would be lessened, and the target of limiting global warming to well below 2 degrees, preferably 1.5 degrees, in comparison to pre-industrial levels, would be more in reach. We know the problem, and we also know the answers, including mitigation and adaptation strategies and policies, but dismissing the importance of these options is a bigger threat to the way in which we develop in the years to come. So, to start with, what is climate change denial? Normally, when people think of this term, they think of literal denial, relating to the belief that something is not true and it's a refusal to acknowledge the facts or knowledge of the situation. Without getting too political, a widely known example of this is when Trump originally stated that he wasn't a big believer in global warming. However, the denial machine is much more complex than this to understand. When we refer to denial, this includes the implicatory denial, when there is no attempt to deny the knowledge or interpretation, but instead the severity of its consequences are minimised and can be used to promote inaction opposing SDG13. In simplistic terms, climate change denial refers to the action of denying the existence of climate change, its anthropogenic origins. If someone's not familiar with that word, so the man-made origins, basically taking humans out of the equation, or the implications of climate change. So climate changes naturally. We're going to be looking at some arguments now put forward by climate change deniers. So to start with, this is a very common scientific form of denial. Short-term and long-term changes in Earth's climate appear due to natural climate variability. This causes cyclical and temporary regional and global changes in temperature, precipitation patterns, and other weather-related events. As interglacial and glacial events that happened hundreds of thousands of years ago can be attributed to these naturally occurring fluctuations, it is common for deniers to apply this same theory to the modern steep warming trend. Deniers clutch onto something called the Milankovitch theory, which states that changes in the shape of Earth's orbit and the orientation of Earth's axis of rotation are easy to predict and directly affect the amount of solar energy that actually reaches the Earth. Although this theory endorses that Earth is currently in a variable warming period, orbital eccentricity is insignificant to explaining the current observed drastic climate changes, and therefore climate change cannot be blamed solely on natural phenomena. Indubitably, it has been found that increased solar activity heightens global temperature and distorts regional weather patterns, which further contributes to the climate change happens naturally kind of claim on the denial side. However, this plays a minimal part in climate change when competing with hefty anthropogenic contributions. So we've got the El Nino, which denotes the variation of sea surface temperatures, wind patterns, and surface air pressures over the Pacific Ocean. We've got El Nino at one extreme, La Nina at the other. We've got various other oscillations that all produce parallel climate effects corresponding to extreme weather events, temperatures, and rainfall. Weather effects from these events are felt regionally and predict smaller scale trends in comparison to the Milankovitch and sunspot cycles. Therefore, deniers view natural changes to the climate as ideal scapegoats to use when dissociating climate change from anthropogenic emissions. However, they are inadequate at explaining the current warming trend alone. So we have time, it's not urgent. Next, other deniers do not refute the science behind climate change, but the severity of its consequences and the necessity to act urgently, originating from a technologically optimistic worldview, which conveys how growth is limitless and man-made innovation is the ultimate resource. Neo-skepticism supplies a meta-theoretical base for narrower efforts to confront proof of anthropogenic climate change. So in this sense, the seriousness of implications of climate change is dismissed, climate positive policies are put on the firing line, and science, technology, and the free market are seen as shields from climate change. This also ties in with economic denial, where climate protective policies are undermined due to associated economic costs and other trade-offs, which illuminates the transition from a scientific basis of opposition to an implication-focused standstill. This line of thought labels mainstream strategies as a form of denial, as they remain insufficient at addressing the systemic factors causing climate change. This is potentially more toxic than literal denial, as it is a more subtle way of attacking environmentalism from the inside. By dodging the real roots of the problems, deniers turn to prescribe technological fixes and market mechanisms, repudiating the need for a revolution of our unsustainable social system. The aim is to avoid rushing to solve the problem until a future date arrives when humans are wealthier, more advanced, and hence more able to find climate solutions. This ideology refuses to believe the detrimental threat of risks and extended vulnerabilities associated with global warming and the uncertainty and significance of climate-related impacts by promoting inaction alongside insufficient action. So another one, we've probably all heard this one. So climate change is good. Climate change is not always believed to be a bad thing, and this type of denial is known as humanitarian. This is similar to neo-skepticism in the way that it poses an obstacle to climate action, but chooses a different frame by accepting that climate change is happening, but minimizing the implications due to a belief that positive outcomes outweigh the negatives. Farming productivity due to longer and warmer summers is a key driver behind this argument. However, trade-offs such as increased frequency of heat waves and drier summers are forgotten about completely. Extreme weather events and disproportionate extreme temperatures will negatively affect farming productivity, but this is completely ignored as well. Another common claim that plants need the extra CO2 for its fertilizing capabilities is true, but deforestation, land use changes virtually nullify this minor effect. The notion that climate change has done more good than harm to the planet, and that it's likely to continue doing so, is supported by other identified benefits, including smaller energy costs, higher agricultural yields, less droughts, greater biodiversity, and fewer winter deaths. And actually, this fewer winter deaths is deceptive, as often cold is not the killer, and more people die of heat-related deaths rather than cold ones, as vulnerable people struggle to afford heating due to unevenly distributed wealth in societies. So overall, highlighting the few slight benefits of climate change is inadequate when rationalising the fatality of the climate risks faced by all life on the Earth. And the last argument I'm going to look at is climate action is communism in disguise. If we could have the next slide. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Whilst climate change is an environmental problem, it's also at the heart of a political debate, and therefore it is important not to dismiss the alliance pursued between climate change denial and the right-wing movement specifically. Conservatives argue that climate action conflicts with a broader framework of their chief values of free markets, laissez-faire governments, property rights, etc. Moreover, the right-wing movement, after the collapse of the Berlin Wall and Soviet Union, saw a new enemy and pinpointed environmentalism as a perfect candidate. This was due to climate policies which threaten the spread of global capitalism through market economies, natural sovereignty, privatization of resources, and free trade. As attention started to be paid towards the symptoms of environmental degradation due to unrestrained economic growth and technological progress, the almost hegemonic dominant social paradigm aided the foundation of the political environmentalist battle on the ground. So viewed as a tool for world government, the IPCC marks the face of the enemy for conservatives for its ability to facilitate these new international regulations, the coordination of global action and state intervention that the climate emergency requires is perceived as communism in disguise. Due to its rejection of scientific method, the denial of climate change is also related to far-right populism, and polarization of these politics ensure that now, for as long as denial continues, conservatives are finding new ways in which to elaborate on their arguments. So now I want to kind of skim over some strategies of denying, which can be identified. So there are various approaches to manufacturing uncertainty in the denial machine, but there are 6 main ones listed here. So first of all, with conspiracy creation, when minimal evidence can be sought to support the climate change denialist hypothesis, the aim of the movement transforms from seeking new proof to discrediting existing findings as part of a global conspiracy. Framing climate change as a conspiracy effectively serves as a distraction for those who would like to curb the physical realities of global warming and its threat to humanity. This is kind of one of the most obvious and clear ones, like the Trump example before, like I'm not a believer or it's fake or whatever. This is ones that are kind of more in your face. It's the literal denial that we were talking about earlier. Next, to impossible expectations. So the uncertainty surrounding climate change models is often used as an excuse to deny the science. And a common argument is that if scientists are unable to predict the weather next week, how are they able to make predictions about the climate for decades to come? So presenting a clear misunderstanding between climate as the weather averaged over time and sporadic, unpredictable day-to-day weather. So this is a clear example of how deniers try to create expectations that are unattainable for climate scientists to fulfill in order to exaggerate the uncertainty. This technique plays on the fact that there are various difficulties involved in predicting future climate and the behaviour of the sun, as well as other short-term perturbations which are hard to model. This devises the unrealistic expectation for climate scientists that climate science needs to be completely certain for society to act, and it has detrimental consequences for climate science, as some scientists take the approach of exaggerating their concern with uncertainty to satisfy the allegations of deniers. There are various research reports on this as well, and how often scientists now have to use the words uncertain science after announcing their findings. It's kind of a shame when they're still the science is still clear, the facts are still clear, but exaggerating the fact they have to be uncertain right now actually has detrimental consequences for climate change denial movement. Fake science and expert. So in the early stages of the climate change denial movement, after an unsuccessful search for proof, deniers made large investments into building the scientific argument needed to prove their case. So this method of climate change denial follows the footsteps of the tobacco industry, which saw the establishment of a sound science programme in 1993 to discredit environmental science on the effects of secondhand smoke. The fossil fuel industry in particular reacts similarly to various environmental protection measures put in place by joining with right-wing media and think tanks to produce a vast amount of material labelling environmental science as junk science. Calls for sound science imply that climate science is unsound and help deniers to build a smokescreen behind which polluters can lobby against measures which threaten their own profits. The hiring of contrarian scientists with strong scientific credentials but minimal expertise actually in climate change specifically is another common characteristic of the denial machine. Another key method used to deny climate change is to shift the responsibility from the people with influence who need to take action onto the people with less of an influence or into forms of less efficient solutions. Individualism is a form of climate change denial, as the emphasis is placed onto individual actions solely, such as recycling or using energy-efficient light bulbs, or not flying, as a way of dodging political means and serious engagement with more social solutions required to respond to the threat. Techno-optimists also put forward technological solutions, such as geoengineering, energy efficiency, alternative energy sources for solving the climate crisis, but this also denies the need for institutional reform and is insufficient at addressing the social factors. Green growthism is a form of climate change denial, as approaches aimed at achieving both economic and environmental goals simultaneously as a win-win proposition are misleading, as it isn't yet possible to decouple environmental harm from economic activity. On to the last two. So cherry picking is a renowned technique used by the denial machine to suggest a commitment to science where none exists. Sometimes when scientific investigations show errors or anomalies, they can still be apparent in peer-reviewed journals, despite going against the scientific consensus. This poses an ideal opportunity for climate change deniers to commonly select isolated papers or narrow ranges of data. For example, scientists will only publish part of the data or graph. That challenges the status quo in order to effectively cherry pick what they need to prove their own argument. And lastly, a common strategy used for denying climate change is astroturfing. It defines itself as an advertising technique which disguises itself as committed research. Often institutes are set up to lobby for a political interest, and they are branded as objective or neutral institutions. Vocabulary deployed by AstroTurf organisations establishes a stamp of scientific legitimacy to the denial machine, and the effects of this are detrimental, as studies show that participants exposed even to the websites of these organisations tend to become less certain about the reality of climate change, less convinced of the magnitude of the crisis, and less convinced of human responsibility to address the issue. So now if we could move on to the last slide of my presentation. So it comes up quite small on here, unfortunately. It was quite big to fit on a slide, but I found this graph from the latest, 2018 special IPCC report, very interesting and relevant to this topic. So mitigation options deployed in each sector can be associated with potential positive effects, synergies, or negative effects, trade-offs, with the Sustainable Development Goals. But obviously, the degree to which this potential is realised will depend on other contributing factors. SDG13 is not listed in this one because mitigation is being considered in terms of climate change's interactions with other SDGs, and not vice versa. But I focused on this graph because I think it's a clear way of illustrating just how many benefits and synergies there are to adopting climate mitigation options now, for not only the expected SDG 13, obviously, if we try and help climate change, it's going to help SDG 13 climate action, but also for all other SDGs, demonstrating how detrimental climate change denial is as an opponent to not only obviously SDG 13, but the whole of the broad framework of sustainable development. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you. I hope you could all understand me through my huskiness.
Thank you so much, Miss Victoria. That was amazing. Give me a moment. For the wonderful session. Hats off to your commitment in spite of your tough situation. You joined us today and gave us such an inspiring presentation. We pray that you get well soon and continue doing the amazing work you have been doing. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
So with that, we have come to the end of day 14, where we focused exclusively on a very important SDG, on SDG 13, climate action. Let me take this opportunity to thank each one of you for joining us today. Hope you all enjoyed the sessions. Please join us next Friday, same time, as we discuss another very important sustainable development goals, SDG 14, life below water, and what SMEs can contribute in achieving SDG 14. See you all next week. Till then, this is Aparna G. Kumar signing off. Take care. Stay safe. Bye-bye.